The next question I actually have is for Clint. You're talking a little bit more about standards. And with this kind of emergence from a kind of institutional healthcare system where you have to go to the device in order to receive that care, and now you're moving towards a less regulated environment where you have devices. How do you deal with standardization of companies who historically have had a very high barrier of entry, and so there's kind of a club, as it were, in order to get into that environment? Now, with this unregulated, not unregulated, but less regulated area, you've got the ability for anybody to really jump in and start being an innovator. Where do standards kind of come into play for that?
Well, we're really taking devices that are still cleared by the FDA, like a non-SpO2 meter or an NAD cuff, and really putting them in the home and making it. What will happen with the cloud, as was mentioned earlier, is that you'll have this data at home, you'll take measurements, but now you'll get real meaning from it. Before, people, I think Eric Topol of the West Institute said that he would ask his patients to take their blood pressure readings. They do it for about a week. And then when they do come back to the doctor, all the blood pressure readings are written on one piece of paper. So you know darn good and well they didn't have that one piece of paper the whole time. They wrote it before they came into the office. So what we're doing is building these specifications to actually enable the home use, the mobile use of these. So really it's not, I wouldn't say unregulated, but I would just say that we're taking and building, making sure that the privacy and security is built into that. That's medical grade. And so that's really what Continua is doing. And so when we have this data at home, suddenly what we found, there's a company, Entra Technologies, here in San Diego that makes a glucose meter with a Bluetooth in it. And what they found, and they use it with Android phones, and what they found is that the patient just knowing they're connected is more compliant. But what will eventually happen is that you'll have companies come in with social networking tools that will actually allow you to connect with other patients like you. And it's really going to be the social network that drives an awful lot of this. With the West Institute, we did some work in Mexico, and we went to meet with some diabetics that were in a village, and these 4 women came in and they had their same tracksuits. They could only afford 1 meter per week. That was about all they could do, but they banded together, worked with each other to actually get their disease under control. And that was a big wake up for us, which is that they trusted themselves for advice more than their doctors. And so what we're going to do with Continua is actually enable this social network to develop, but with regulated tools.
May I add to that? Of course, Intel was one of the founding members of Continua as well, I think. And I think one of the things we recognize is we go back to where standards is just so vital to lower cost. And if anybody, I don't know what the ages are here, but certainly before USB, I'll just use that one, it's probably the most popular. You printers, et cetera, were all high priced. You couldn't figure out which one would work, which one wouldn't work, et cetera. And so by bringing in, of course, USB to Light and other standards, Wi-Fi is another great example, right? Before that, there were wireless uses back in the late 80s, or late 90s rather, but there weren't standards. And so now, once the standards were like Wi-Fi, again, you have the same kind of phenomenon. So I think that's exactly what Continua is going to do, is that by bringing believable standards, and one of the key things too, you have other technologies out there that do connect various, be it ANT, be it some other proprietary protocols that do work. But one of the challenges is you don't have the medical community actually having input in what those standards look like. Okay, that's one thing Continua, again, is a differentiation has. It has Philips is on board, GE is a member, you have the medical community, Medtronic is a member. So what's great about Continua as a distinctive organization is they already have those types on board, and they're already making sure those kind of the concerns they have are met. So consequently, the data that comes from those units will be more believable than, let's say, from organizations that don't have physicians and medical counterparts. So. And
the other great example about Continua and standards bodies is that public companies are involved trying to make these, and Intel is a founding member. Intel and Qualcomm are fierce competitors, but we're in this together to make this standard so that we can all raise the tide that will rise all boats. So it's very important to have these bodies. And so up to now, Continua has had its head down building the specifications. But as you probably all know, there's a huge chasm between wireless and the healthcare industry. So Continua is one of the few places where we all get together and try to put these, and have pulled this together.
Are there any places where there aren't current standards, but you're working hard to bring those standards in?
I think that we've put the end-to-end component together. Now what we're working on in the next iteration will be consent. So who gets your data and how do you release it? We've got the privacy and security built in. And so that component is there right now, end to end.
Great. But I'm going to move on to Mike and talk about a little bit about quality of service and security issues, not in terms of data integrity, but on the device and the importance of that in terms of going mobile. Obviously, multi-core is a big part of Intel's business. How does multi-core bring kind of quality of service and address security concerns on the device?
Okay, one of our critical concerns as we start to stare at this, and I guess, quite frankly, Intel has of course been involved, but and more into the in this case data center and security in that sense. But as I start to analyze this, you know, there's a clear situation where you have to start concerning yourself with quality of service with the device itself. You know, when you start to gather data, or going to trust this unit to gather data, and it's in an environment that's not a hospital or some such. You know, how do you know it's going to gather the data properly? Okay, or even if it is in a hospital and it's connected to your network, how do you know? So one of the ways that you can help solve that, and when I say quality of service, let me define that. In general, if you have a situation that, let's just talk about the hospital elements for a moment. If you have a situation where you have a denial of service attack, okay, well, if that happens, how do you know that the ventilator, if it gets at 2 a.m., is still going to work? And I'll just kind of use that as the most startling example, but that's an example. So in other words, as these devices start to gather data, we need to come up with ways that you can make sure that they continue to still work. And the cell phone arena, you have the situation where you've got, if the person is watching his iTunes apps, okay, and it's, you know, it's an app that's maybe a little bit ill-behaved, is he still going to be able to take his ECG data that he can send to his physician? I don't know. So those are kind of things. So one way you can solve that problem, or start to at least address the problem, is to use multi-core. And Intel, of course, has a lot of experience in that. But we have other Qualcomm and other companies, quite frankly, are generating multi-core solutions as well. And so what we're starting to look at, and maybe even start to throw into the community, is start considering making sure that modality really is going to be able to continue to give service no matter what other application you have on that machine. And it's particularly true in, I think, in the mobile space. One of the things that's challenging is, since that particular device, phone or whatever, is not designed to necessarily take data, the only thing that really has priority necessarily is a phone call. Okay? Other items on that phone may or may not have priority, or may not be modulated in such a way to make sure quality of service is maintained. So again, if you use a multi-core, you can actually use the one core to actually do the network interface, for example. So if you did a denial of service on that's one core, then the other core could be handling in the mobile space, it could be handling, you know, things like the ECG or medical related, or if you're in the hospital setting, it could be handling the ventilator operation, while the denial of service stack is on the other core, right? And eventually you could, you know, recognize it and alert. So that's one of the things that we start to look at some of these, that we're going to at least start to say, well, you now have to make sure, now that we say we're going to do this, let's make sure the device can continue to give that function, even though we have all these other applications on board.